Here's another story that happened to me last night. I was about to go to sleep and decided to have one more cigarette. Usually I'm smoking in the kitchen. My apartment is located on the second floor. The light was off, so it was convenient for me to stand in front of the opened window without being watched by someone. It was around 1 a.m. As I was standing there, I thought about one girl to whom I think I have a strong feeling. But I guess it's too late for me because her wedding was planned on the next day with a man with whom they lived for the last 5 years. So defiantly, I didn't have any thoughts about ghosts, spirits, etc. My mind was somewhere else that night. I was thinking about how it would be nice if I only got any chance to be with her. But unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be. Nothing could be further from the truth than my false hopes that one day we'll be together. With my head down, I felt despair, because I couldn't do anything to be with her, so I guess I have to concede. I've almost done with the smoking when I heard a loud sound. It was like if someone had kicked a plastic bottle on the street and then stepped on it. I looked out, but no one was there. Then in the matter of a second, I saw a woman with her dog. They were just walking towards their home. The only thing that was strange was that I saw not 2, but 3 shadows near them. But the third one was kind of strange. It moves back and forth like if it was jumping or something like that. I thought there was somebody else, but when I took a good look around, I saw nobody but the woman and her dog. The shadow seemed to be a little child, but there was no child around. I was standing there and watching all this stuff. I had completely forgotten about the wedding and my sadness. I was curious and convinced that the shadow I have seen was some kind of either spirit or ghost, but I couldn't figure out what it was for sure. After 10-15 seconds, they turned over the house and disappear. So did the shadow. I'm still thinking about it. Later that night, I couldn't fall asleep. Her lips, smile, her eyes, and her voice. My heart is falling apart. I was thinking about the shadow and my girl at the same time. My head was about to explode. I didn't know on what should I focus. I probably saw a ghost right then, for the first time in my life. On the other hand, I have to deal with the fact that I couldn't ever be with her. Well, that's my romantic story. Who knows? Maybe that shadow was some kind of sign to me. Maybe it tells me, hey, don't be so sad. Look at me. Jump with me. I wasn't afraid, nor did I feel any emotions, actually. I was just standing there, watching the shadow that just shouldn't be there, jumping around that old lady and her dog. And one more thing I want to tell you. Take care of your loved one. Cherish each day that you have spent together. After a couple months of searching, we finally found a new place to live within the city of Vladivostok. We wanted to be near to both of our jobs and be in proximity to at least a few stores. Neither of us owned a car, so when we found an apartment flat near the city's trolley network, it seemed like the best of both worlds. The building was brand new, one of the high-rise apartment blocks under construction all over the city. As we were touring with the building manager, he took us through several flat layout options, including 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, etc. There was no paint on the walls yet, just sheetrock with the random spatter of plaster covering screw holes here or there. We found a corner unit on the 10th floor with a view of a nearby park, and we completed all the necessary paperwork. Now, we just had to work out the move-in schedule and wait for the apartment to be finished. I ended up staying in the city midweek at the same tiny hotel where we had been staying following our last move out. Lydia spent much of her time at Babushka's dacha in the country, taking the 45-minute train ride back and forth to her job. On the weekends, we'd meet up there and spend time together. It wasn't ideal, but it was temporary, and we were making it work. The short fall season had come to a close, and winter was already settling harshly across the coastline. Daytime temperatures dropped from a comfortable 15 C during the days to about 5, and it froze every night. We started to make plans for the long, complicated winter holidays, which are so uniquely Russian. the first of these being the Feast of St. Nicholas in early December. If I had to relate it to any American holiday, I'd say it's probably like Thanksgiving, mostly revolving around a large family meal. As the snows began to blanket the Primorsky territory, Ludia and I spent more and more time exploring the area around Babushka's village. The forest was absolutely breathtaking, covered in snow, like something from a fairy tale. Massive groves of pine, deep greens mixed with sharp white snow. Picturesque icy ponds with random deer or red foxes wandering about as they've done since life evolved in that ancient place. One of the places both Ludia and I wanted to visit was the Dead Village, which several villagers had told us about. No one could remember the official name of the town, and it had been abandoned since about 1930. One villager told it was vacated due to a massive influenza outbreak. Another told us it was abandoned due to the risk of sinkholes which threatened to swallow the entire village at any moment. Babushka didn't say much about it when we'd ask. "It is dead," she would say. "Would it make it less dead if you knew why?" It was easy enough to locate. The two villages had once been sister towns. There was still the rough outline of a country road which connected both locations. Easiest access was actually by horseback, which was itself a new experience for me. Ludia drove while I sat behind her. The journey was a bit slow-going in the light, fluffy snow, and we had to stop several times. Finally, around noon, we came to the remains of a checkpoint. These cookie-cutter checkpoints were classic to the early Soviet Union. They provided a sort of guard post and emergency stopping location in case travelers needed help along the road. They were painted bright blue and could hold a couple militsia, Soviet police, troops. Several of the old posts were still visible around other villages in the area, though that they had been long abandoned. This one was little more than an outline, as the ceiling had obviously collapsed decades ago, allowing the wooden skeleton to rot and fail. The village itself was a ghost. You could make out where roads had been once by the tree lines. There were a few twisted frames of what looked like horse-drawn wagons or farm equipment. After 90 years, there wasn't much left that hadn't been claimed by the trees or been blasted to dust by the harsh winters. The entire area was completely still, the only sound coming from the feet of our horse as we made our way through the frozen remains of the town. Around the corner from a massive live oak, we found a stone house. Unlike the other wooden structures which had all but been reclaimed by the forest, this building stood mostly intact. The front-facing windows were lined in stained glass, which Ludia said meant it was most likely the country home of some aristocrat, probably repurposed after its former owner was arrested or shot in the revolution. We stopped, dismounted, and explored the exterior of the ruins. One of the outer walls had collapsed and gave us full access to the first floor. Looking upward, a flood of light filtered down through the rotted floorboards, nothing blocking it out as the roof was completely gone over the first room. The narrow rays of light played tricks in the shadows, making it look like the walls were moving, dancing as we passed by. As we walked through the main entry hall, Ludia took several steps up what remained of the stairwell and stopped. I was distracted, looking at what appeared to be bullet holes in the plaster near the front door. Ludia called my name a few times before I finally heard her and passed back around to where she was standing. She was frozen in place, her foot actually hanging where it had stopped as she had prepared to step up. Her eyes were locked on a dark area, just through a crooked doorway at the top of the stairs. "Do you see it?" she asked me in a whisper. "See what?" I asked her back. I stared up at the open doorway, straining my eyes to make out anything, but there was only blackness. "There's someone standing there, looking at us." She motioned with her hand as she said it. Moving closer to Ludia, I took a position directly next to her, standing on the same step. Nothing. I took another step up. The wood of the stairs was spongy and giving way more than I liked. At about the 5th step, I stopped. I could see something, perhaps what she was talking about. It had shape, and it was roughly the size and outline of a man. The edges weren't clear, so it was hard to make out an exact size or the dimensions. The form was a dark, smoky gray against the black of the hallway behind it. It definitely appeared to be watching us, standing, or floating, or whatever you'd call it, just at the top of the steps. I stood there, dumbfounded. I had never seen anything like that before. My mind churned over the possibilities, but I was aware of a nagging fear as well. Something told me I should leave, but I couldn't turn my attention away. Ludia called out to the figure from behind me, asking who or what it was. The sound of her voice is what it took to snap me back from my transfixed stare. Backing down the stairs, I took her hand and directed her a few steps back toward our entry point. "We should go," I said to her, and she agreed. Before we moved on, however, she raised her camera from its place around her neck and snapped a photo. The intense light from the flash shocked my eyes, and it took several seconds for them to recover. When they had, I returned my gaze to the stairwell. The figure was gone. We made our way back out of the ruins and to the horse. For the ride back, we couldn't stop talking about. To this day, when I close my eyes and think back to it, I can picture things so clearly. Babushka, as usual, was not impressed when we told her what we saw. "Nesvan je gosti," she said to us. "Even ghosts hate uninvited guests." I live in a small provincial town. You might even call that a settlement in the depth of Russia. Like many semi-rural places all over the world, this one, let's call it K, feels the impact of urbanization, which I personally do not find all that healthy of a process. Over the last 2 decades, lots and lots of shops and small shopping points have been opening in K, far more than necessary to provide its people with all sorts of goods. One of such points is named Iridescent Raduzhny in Russian, supposedly after the color of its walls, which don't actually resemble a rainbow spectrum and are instead rather boring stripes of beige, gradating from light to dark. For some reason, I sincerely hated going to that particular place. Iridescent houses mainly clothing stores, but also a gardening shop and a hairdresser. It was solely the latter I visited the place for. The hairdresser, let's call her L, is a very gentle lady who knows me since the early childhood. I always felt that she has a very kind soul, and I think that I am very lucky to trust my hair to such a person. Now, L previously worked in another building, which is also a local post office. This was the place of her work for many, many years, but she was forced to move to Iridescent recently. Needless to say, I wasn't feeling good about going there, even if it was still L who worked with my hair. I just couldn't explain what exactly I felt wasn't right with this building. Speaking objectively, it was fairly new and hastily built, so the interior wasn't comfortable at all, and the corridors between the shops were quite narrow. But it wasn't just that. When I was there once, I had to meet a rather disagreeable person, which further worsened my impression. Then I ended up having some awkward conversation with people I barely know. Those could have been just common, unfortunate encounters. Yet I just couldn't help feeling very uneasy about all this. But Elle seemed to be fine, and I still felt more or less okay in her presence. Then a bit later, I learned that Elle moved her business to a place that was just outside Iridescent. It was the first floor of a cafe, I think. That still didn't go well with me, and soon for Elle as well. During this period, I noticed that the cafe on the ground floor attracted many shady types, alcoholics, and possibly thugs. But this was almost typical for this neighborhood. What I wasn't expecting was Elle getting kicked out of her new place. She told me, while unsuccessfully trying to cover her tears, that the property owner asked an enormous sum as a rent. Soon she moved to a completely different place, far from Iridescent. I was feeling very sorry for her, but at the same time I was also genuinely content about not having to go there anymore. When I first visited Elle's business at the new place, we talked a little about the reasons why she was forced to move. Then, among other things, She mentioned the strange occurrences she experienced while working at Iridescent. The traders, including her, were frequently hearing footsteps in places where were no customers or traders or anyone else. The building has multiple floors, and apparently the upper section was temporarily empty and nobody was using it for some time. Yet this was where the sounds were coming from. According to Elle, the footsteps were fairly distinct. Some people also reported their wares being moved. Clothes on display touched as if by invisible hand. Then someone mentioned that a terrible crime happened on this location long ago. A girl was raped and murdered. They didn't find who did it. The rumor goes that the place is haunted by this girl's restless ghost. I've been told that earlier this piece of land was occupied by a school. Perhaps it all happened there. Between this period and Iridescent, the place was simply devoid of any constructions. I told Elle about disliking the place in general, and she wasn't surprised, only telling me that perhaps I can sense these things. I would call myself a very sensitive person in general, so this could be true. Maybe I was repelled by the ghost's energy. Of course, one can discard my feelings as subjective altogether and call minor unlucky events, and perhaps even Elle's bad luck with her business in Iridescent building, a series of coincidences, but in conjunction with the history of this place and the unexplained sounds and movements, a picture is forming. And that picture still gives me chills, especially that the building is still there to this day.